We've got Henry Hill with us from Conservative Home, looking at the big stories of the day. And this one, Britain will not shy away from robust action over Putin's spy ships. Well, we've got Trump at the moment, Henry. He's, of course, having words, apparently, either directly or indirectly, with Mr. Putin. And now our own man, Defence Secretary John Healey, is also throwing warnings towards Red Square. Let's have a listen to what Mr. Healey said this morning.
And I also want President Putin to hear this message. We see you, we know what you're doing, and we will not shy away from robust action to protect this country.
Well, this came around, of course, Henry, because a nuclear-powered submarine surfaced in November, sending warnings to its crew that it had spotted some Russian vessels near some communication cables under the sea, as it were. Do you think Mr. Putin will be quaking in his boots after hearing the words of John Healey?
I mean, Russia does this forever, right? I mean, sometimes with sea vessels, more often with aircraft. The RAF gets scrambled to defend British or Irish airspace from Russian planes on flight paths that they wouldn't. It's a test of our nerve and their capability, and it's a reminder that there's actually an awful lot of very critical global infrastructure under the oceans, which is very hard to protect. And actually, this includes increasingly things like connectors from offshore wind, right? Vital parts of the grid. You only need to send something under there to cut them, and you can't patrol all of them at once. The question, of course, is what does robust action look like? You know, do I fundamentally think that the people at the Kremlin are thinking, oh, we better stay out of British territorial waters because, if it comes to it, Britain will sink one of our ships?
Yeah.
No. If you're not going to do that, and that's not necessarily a criticism of the government, I'm not necessarily saying we should go around sinking the ships of a nuclear armed power, but if you're not going to do that, what does robust action look like, and what can you do, again, if you've got somebody who is willing to break the rules and violate your sovereign waters?
And I wonder as well, we know how hammered the armed forces have been. We know that Russia punches above its weight, but one area that it likes to spend cash is in the military area. I'm not absolutely sure whether words from the Defence Secretary today, we see you, we hear you, we know where you are, kind of things, might have, the sort of Churchillian script, but falls on deaf ears maybe in the 21st century. We've not really got the might to back it up, and I'm not sure John Healey is the fearful character that's going to put the frighteners on President Putin.
I think that we've certainly criminally neglected defence. I think there was a really sort of awful set of headlines where the same day that Starmer made that 100-year defence pact with Ukraine, which mostly involves money, the armed forces said that we don't have enough troops to guard the Ukrainian border if there was a demilitarised zone, even in the event of peace. Russia, it's very easy to talk about the Russian economy being the size of Spain's and all the rest of it. It's all true, but it spends 8% of GDP on defence. It has a much clearer idea than we do of what it wants its army to be doing and where it wants it to be, i.e. countries next to Russia. So there are serious problems. Putin won't be listening to us. He'll be listening to Trump because America has a much bigger role, vital role in the Ukrainian war effort. The question is, when Trump says, I know it sounds like he's talking tough to Putin, I want a deal. But the challenge is actually Zelensky as well, because it might be that Vladimir Putin is up for a deal where he gets to keep, even without international recognition, the 20% of Ukraine that he's occupied and crucially annexed, and now acts as if and says that are formally part of the Russian Federation. But Zelensky's not going to go for that.
I wouldn't imagine so. It's going to be interesting what the next few months pan out like in terms of that specific area of Ukraine and Russia. Final story here, Henry. BBC accused of bias, not for the first time, of course. This is claims that the Donald Trump's election victory was fueled by fear. One of the reports, this was their reporter John Sudworth, who interviewed an illegal immigrant, didn't interview any pro-Trump voices. Interesting, I read a report yesterday and I tried to, when you read something you think, oh, the next day I'll try and find where I read that. Can't find it for love nor money. But the BBC were accused of a pro-Trump bias by some people who were saying, hang on, all you spoke to was people who were wearing those big Make American Great Again hats, and there was lots of jubilation, big Trump supporters. Where were the critics? So, I mean, the BBC would say, well, we can't win on this. They've defended its impartiality, claiming it includes a wide range of views, including Trump supporters. And, of course, to address bias, they don't have to show it necessarily on the same news report. It does. So you might have seen John Sudworth's report, which didn't interview any pro-Trump people, but the next day on the news, they can get away with that by saying, well, you know, we had the pro-Trump supporters on the next day news and didn't have any illegal immigrants or whatever it was. That's their answer to that. Is that good enough, Henry?
I have a lot of sympathy with the BBC on this, because there's competing definitions of objectivity versus balance, right? And they are always going to be skewered by people who don't think they've got the balance of that right. So particularly we saw during Brexit, people who thought Brexit was obviously mad thought that the BBC were neglecting their duty by putting Brexiteers up, because they were like, but Brexit is obviously wrong.
Yeah, they accused, I mean, in particular, Nigel Farage. I think the count of how many appearances Nigel Farage had on the BBC outweighed any other single commentator. So that was seen as the BBC being pro-Brexit.
I know, which is ridiculous.
Sounds extraordinary.
I think
right?
where the BBC, well, I mean, yeah, it's, but I think where the BBC does suffer and struggle and can be legitimately criticised is when it says things with its editorial voice, even if it doesn't necessarily, you know, a thoughtless journalist writes Donald Trump's victory was based on fear. And that isn't a quote from somebody. Yeah. That isn't a description of analysis by somebody else. But that is spoken with the BBC's voice.
That's editorialising the facts, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what the BBC can be rightly criticised for.
Correct.
It's not. I'm sure it's not policy. It wasn't the Director General making that decision. It's the biases of the individual reporter. But it is something they need to be much more careful about.
Indeed. Henry, thank you. Henry Hill is Deputy Editor over there at Conservative Home. Thank you to him.